Hello everyone and welcome. This is Chris from Swatera Media. Something that can really get in the way of the creative process is render time. For DaVinci Resolve in particular, when it's rendering, you're not able to continue editing. However, if you're fortunate enough to have a second computer available, there is a way to remotely use that second computer to render your projects instead of tying up your main computer's resources. The steps in the DaVinci Resolve 17 manual cover a lot of this, but doesn't cover the nitty-gritty of getting your drives prepared to be visible on the network by both computers. This will be a tutorial from an artist's perspective and will be the easiest way to get up and running. I know there are probably better ways and methods available, but I wanted to keep things straightforward. We're going to go step by step through the whole process and also touch on some problems you may run into along the way. If there's anything I missed or if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them in the comments. Before we get started, a few caveats. You will need the paid studio version of DaVinci Resolve installed on both computers for this to work. You'll also need a copy of DaVinci Resolve Project Server, which can be found through the link in the description. To find it on the page, you'll want to click on DaVinci Resolve and Fusion Software, and then under Latest Downloads, we go down until we find the latest version. There it is, DaVinci Resolve Project Server. When you go to install DaVinci Resolve Project Server, make sure that all of your options are checked. The most important option among them is PostgreSQL. Another thing to keep in mind is network speed. I'm personally using remote rendering wirelessly, but I'm fortunate to have a very strong Wi-Fi with a fiber optic connection. If at all possible, use Ethernet to connect both computers to your network. Additionally, this tutorial will cover setting up a network between two PCs running Windows 10. I'm not personally familiar with how to do so between a Mac and a PC, but if you watch the next section, it might help you on your journey. For simplicity's sake, as I'm going to be referring to both computers a lot, I'm going to use the terminology from the Resolve manual. The artist computer is the one you want to be able to edit on, and the remote computer is the one that will do the rendering. One final thing are plugins. Both machines will need third-party plugins installed, otherwise your render computer won't be able to make complete sense of your project. I personally use Mocha Pro by BorisFX and will need to install that on my render computer as well. My workaround for this is fairly simple. I just duplicate my video tracks with the Mocha effects and then use render in place on the originals. This way the effects are baked in, but I still have access to the effects if I need them. Paying BorisFX a few more dollars a month is faster, but if you're not familiar with networking computers and drives together, here's the overview of our goal. We need to set up a drive that can be accessible between both computers on your network. That way both computers can not only access your Resolve project files, but also all the footage and assets you're using inside of your project. One of the better options for this is to use something called a NAS, or Network Attached Storage, which is a device specifically made for this purpose. Technically, any drive connected to your computer should work, but if you must use something else, aim to use a drive that is permanently attached to your computer. For me, I have several SSDs in my machine, and I'm currently using one of those as my network drive. It's not ideal, I know. The Resolve manual specifically mentions using an SAN, or Storage Area Network, for this purpose. This isn't something I'm personally familiar with, but I've linked an article in the description if you want to read more about this solution. At this point, you'll want to make sure that both DaVinci Resolve Studio and DaVinci Resolve Project Server are installed on both your artist and remote machines. Additionally, you'll want to make sure both copies of DaVinci Resolve are activated with a license code. The first step is to ensure that all the programs involved in this process have the ability to pass through Windows Firewall. To do this, you want to go down to the search bar and type in Firewall, and Windows Defender Firewall will come up. Once you have Windows Firewall open, you want to click on Allow an app or feature through the Windows Defender Firewall. At the top right, you want to click Change Settings, and from here in this list, you'll want to look for, first, DaVinci Resolve. There's a couple entries here. I'm sure there are ways to be a little bit more surgical with this, but I just made sure that every DaVinci Resolve instance in this list had access both publicly and privately just by clicking these little check marks here. And once you've done that, you want to scroll down in that same list and look for PostgreSQL Server and make sure both private and public are checked for that. I also enabled that for the terminal here. I didn't do private though. Maybe. No, I have it set up. I'm going to leave it alone. And then we just click OK. Now, you want to do that same exact thing on your remote computer. This step will ensure the services used by Resolve can properly communicate between computers. If you have issues even after making this change, you can open your firewall further, but do so with caution, as it can allow unsavory people to connect to you as well. Now the next step will be to give network access to the folder you wish to use between the artist and remote PCs. We'll begin this step on your artist PC. Everyone has a different way of working, so this will look different depending on your workflow. When I receive footage from a client, I will copy that footage from their drive into my working hard drive. Within that drive are subfolders for each project, which contain all the footage and all the other assets used in the project. The end goal here is to ensure that all drives that contain files referenced by your Resolve projects are available on the network. You may need to repeat this process depending on how many drives you work with. So with the topmost folder of your working drive selected, which I'm going to come in here, we'll grab my scratch disk. We'll use this for this demonstration. We'll go to the folder, right click, go down and hit Properties. From here, we want to choose Sharing. We want to choose Share. Now in this box here, we're going to type everyone. And then for the permission level, we're going to choose read and write. And we'll click share. Excellent. Now one thing you'll want to do is make note of this network path here, because we'll need that in a later step. So I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. I'd suggest putting it somewhere a little bit more permanent, or writing it down. That'll work too. Now that we have our drive shared, we're going to need to map it. Resolve plays nicest when you've assigned a letter to your drive, such as how your default main drive is labeled C by Windows. In this step, we're going to be mapping your newly shared folder so it can appear as a network drive on your remote computer. So for this step, hop onto your remote computer, and I'll do that now. So now that we're on your remote computer, we'll go to this PC. If your drive isn't showing up automatically, just go ahead and right-click anywhere in this window and click Add a Network Location. And here, we'll go ahead and paste that network location. And now we see that we have access to it. And now it's showing up here amongst all our other network locations. Now, as I mentioned before, we want to add a drive letter to this folder. So we'll go up here at the top and click on Map Network Drive. We can choose a cool letter that we want to use for this purpose. I'll choose R this time. And here we're also going to go ahead and paste or type back in our network location. And we'll click Finish. Now that drive is mapped. Now if you tried that previous step and you got some errors that it wasn't able to connect, just double check that you've typed in the network location correctly. It is very specific, including the direction of the slashes and everything, so make sure that you've got that typed in properly. You'll want to then test this connection by attempting to access the folders and writing to them to double check that the connection is active between the two computers. If you run into any issues with this part, you may want to dive deep into tutorials that are specifically geared towards networking drives between PCs. I'm a complete fool when it comes to this sort of thing, this like really technical side of it, but I was able to get it working, so I'm pretty confident you'll be able to as well. If you're familiar with working in Resolve, you'll know that Resolve uses databases to store your projects. To get this to work, we're going to set up a shared database between these two computers. So that way both will be able to access all of your projects. Now, at least at the time of this recording, there isn't a way to convert an existing local database into a shared database. The next step is to set up Resolve and the DaVinci Resolve project server to use a shared database. Practically, this means you'll be able to access all projects in the database on both machines. Since we'll be creating a new database, you will need to migrate any projects you want to render remotely to this new database. The fastest way to do this is to first open up the project you want to export. We'll use this one here. We'll go to File, Export Project. We'll choose a location for it and save. Then, in our project manager, we'll go to our database, and I'll actually probably create a new database for this, and go to Import Project. And we navigate to that project file and import it. And this here is my remote server. We have some projects in here. And it looks and feels exactly the same as a normal database, except it's accessible on both machines. As we can see, if we go over here and we open up Resolve, we can see that same server here, and we're able to access it. Now, there are a couple of different ways to set up the remote rendering, including the ability to do it with a headless computer and use the command line to be able to tell it what to do. Not familiar with that. They describe it in the Resolve manual, and there should be some other tutorials out there that cover that specific setup. But in this case, we'll be sticking to two Windows PCs with a graphical interface. To begin this setup, we'll first make sure that we're on our artist computer, and we're going to go ahead and open up the DaVinci Resolve server application. Now, as I was figuring this out, I ended up with a bunch of different servers, but you can ignore these. We're going to set up a fresh one just for this purpose. So up in the toolbar at the top, we're going to click New Database, and we'll give it a name. And now what we're going to do is click on that database, and we're going to click on this Enable Sharing button. This is right next to the one we just clicked. And it'll ask you to authorize configuration, and we'll say authorize. And then Windows will ask you to authenticate. Now, still on your artist computer, we're going to want to open up DaVinci Resolve. And at the bottom of the project manager page, now by the way, if you don't see this sidebar, it's this little button here. We're going to click Connect Database. And in this case, we're going to choose PostgreSQL. And we're going to choose the name of it. I already forgot what I named it. Test for YouTube. Cool. So once you have the name in there, we're going to look at this location here. Now, this is going to be your IP address, and there's a couple ways to find this. One way is to open up command prompt and type in ipconfig, and it should show up in this list here. For me, it's this one. I don't like doing it that way because I get confused by network stuff, and once I see more than one IP address, I kind of freak out. So another way to find this is if we go back over to the server application, we go to File and go to Network Interface, it'll tell you right there exactly what your IP address is and the one that you'll want to, the exact one you'll want to put in this box. So we're going to type in for me 192.168.1.234. Is that what it was? I always forget it. 192.168.1.234. Yep. And we'll click Connect. Now, if that worked out properly, you should see your newly created database show up on the side here. If it gives you any troubles or errors, double check your IP address, double check the spelling of the database name. Perhaps remove the database from the server application and then add it again. Basic troubleshooting like that. But as long as you have everything typed in correctly, it should work just fine. And for now, we're going to want to leave this untitled project here right where it is. Now, this next step may be unnecessary, but it's a problem that initially prevented me from completing my renders. They would fail every single time I tried to start it on the remote computer. So for this step, we're going to make a modification to one of the files within that PostgreSQL installation on the artist's computer. So for this first step, we'll go ahead to our search bar and type in Notepad, but we don't want to open it just yet. We want to right click on it and run it as administrator. Now here, we're going to go to File, Open. We're going to navigate to your installation, which by default should be local disk C. We go to Program Files. Scroll down a bit, you should see PostgreSQL. We'll go to the version number, it should be 9.5 or whatever you end up with. And we go to Data. And now if you're not seeing any files that it can open, we come down here and select All Files. And we'll want to open up PG_HBA. Now I've included a link to this in the description. Mine has already been modified, and it looks like it added another entry as well for this new database that I've created. But it's this host all and then the IP address /24 MD5. So in the description you'll see the words your IP address, but you'll just want to replace that text with that IP address that you got from the server application or from command prompt. You want to add that at the very end, then hit save. After you hit save, it's a good idea to just go ahead and restart your computer. As I mentioned, you might not need to make changes to this file, but if you have repeated errors when you try to hit render when you have your remote computer connected to your artist computer, you may need to do this. For the next step, you also want to go in and make note of that IP address that I mentioned when you go into DaVinci Resolve Project Server, Network Interface. We'll want to write that down because we're going to need that soon. So we're going to head over to our remote computer and we'll get this new server set up. So for this, we'll go ahead and make sure that we're in DaVinci Resolve and we'll hit Connect Database. Same as before, we're going to want to go ahead and click PostgreSQL and we're going to enter the name of it, Test for YouTube. And we're going to want to enter that IP address. Let's see if I can do it from memory, 192.168.1.234. So to make sure that's in there, we shouldn't have to change anything else, and we hit connect. Now if everything's correct, we should see this pop up on the side here without any errors or anything like that. And if you do, again, just make sure that everything is spelled correctly. That's going to be the biggest thing. Also double check that you have the right IP address. Again, through that remote server application is the most direct way to know that you have the right one. Now for this step, I'm going to head over to my artist computer. So this next step is going to be applicable to both computers. So this you'll want to complete on each computer that you have. I'm going to do this on my artist computer first. So for any project that you have there, you can open up that untitled project. And we'll go to Preferences. And we just want to make sure that our media storage locations are referencing the network paths that we've created. So if you store all your, so for example, all my footage and everything is in this path here. You just want to make sure to add that. And that can be done by just manually typing that in, or you should be able to grab that from your network locations. If we go to network and then this computer, I have this one here. We can find it right here and just copy We go back to resolve. So to add one, all we want to do is go in here, go to your network locations. In this case, both computers are unfortunately named, but that's okay. You can come in here and choose your path. In this case, I'll choose our new Scratch path, the one that I made for this purpose. And now that is a location. Now this will differ a little bit on the remote computer, and I'll show you how. We'll go ahead and switch over to there. So for this, we'll go to same thing, preferences. Now since we've mapped these, we'll want to choose that. So I can come in here. We should see these showing up on the side on the remote computer. We just choose it and hit select folder. That just makes sure that Resolve knows where to look for all of your assets. So as you can see, this is what it looks like on the remote computer, and this is what it'll look like on the artist computer. So a little different, but not bad, not bad. Now it'll be really apparent if you don't have this set up properly, because once you open your project, you'll see media offline messages. So in that case, you may just need to relink them. And what I even had to do on the artist computer is actually change, the files were in the right place on my artist computer, but they weren't referenced as being networked locations. So I actually had to go in and relink them via the network path. So instead of going into my normal drive, I went in through here and chose this and told Resolve to look at this path instead of the normal path. I hope that makes sense. You just want to make sure that Resolve is looking for the networked path, so that way Resolve on your remote computer will know where to look as well. So now that we've done that, pat yourself on the back. The hardest part is over. For this next section, we'll begin on our remote computer. We're going to set our remote computer up to be able to receive renders from our artist computer. So, to do this, I'm going to go ahead and close out of this, and we'll go back to the project manager. So for this, I'm going to choose my existing server, as I already have some projects loaded in here and linked up properly. Now, to arm the remote computer to be able to accept remote renders, we're going to right-click in the project window and choose Remote Rendering. This we can leave alone, because all of the settings are going to be brought over from the artist computer. Now, what we'll go ahead and do is I'm going to switch back to the artist computer. We're going to go in here. I'm going to open up the reel. Lots of fun stuff going on in here, but what we'll do is go to our Deliver tab, and this will actually be mostly the same as normal. Now, one thing we'll want to make sure of is that our location is a non-networked path on the remote computer. That way you'll get the best performance. So you want to make sure that this is a non-networked path on the remote computer. And you can give it a name. I'll just call it test 20, because I actually think I have a lot of tests in that location from when I was trying to get it up and running. And I'll just close out of that. Want to make sure all the settings are good. Now, in this case, my artist computer has an NVIDIA graphics card, and the remote computer has an AMD graphics card. So in this case, we want to choose native. Make sure that is on. And then what we'll go ahead and do is just hit add to render queue as normal. Make sure all your settings are what you want. We'll click on this little Wi-Fi looking icon here, and we're going to choose the computer that we want this to render on. So in this case, it's this one here. And once we got that, we'll just go ahead and click render all. If it asks to save, just say yes. And now we're going to switch over to the remote computer. As we can see, we've already got our project showing up here. It might take a moment to load. It'll be really embarrassing if it doesn't work. I bet there will be an error because that's my luck. It takes a little bit of troubleshooting, but you know, even somebody with an artist's brain like mine that doesn't really like the technical aspects of this, like, you know, setting up network drives and everything like that, I was still able to get this working. So now it'll go through and it should render properly. It's a little slower. I have a 2080 Super in my artist computer, and this on the remote computer is actually an RX 580 from AMD, so it's quite a bit slower, but just having the ability to keep working is very nice. So as we can see, it's doing its thing over here. But if we switch back, we can go ahead and do whatever we want. We don't have to worry about being tied up, and we can even switch projects. Now this one isn't public yet, so I will have to blur it, but you get the idea. So we open up something like that, and if we go back to a remote computer, it's working. It's going to take a little while. 4 hours for a minute-long 4K clip is a little slow, but you can always beef out your remote computer with super fast graphics cards and processors and things like that to be able to make it run a little bit faster than this, but not always needing top speed on all of my projects. So this works for me. Now we'll go back to this project here. Now once your render is finished, you can handle that a couple of different ways. You can use another network drive and drop the file onto there to get it back to your artist computer, or you can upload it to a file sharing, whatever you want. And honestly, that should be it. I think we covered most of the issues that you'll run into, but again, it just comes down to spelling most of the time and making sure that you have the right information that you're entering whenever you connect your databases and network your drives together. But I absolutely love having this ability, especially when juggling multiple clients. And as I mentioned before, please leave any questions you might have in the comments and I'll answer as many as I can. Take care and stay healthy.